This all started when Ennio started telling about his mom's favorite movie, one where the main character, a very famous actress, played the role of a girl who was about to become a mom and lived in a store in a big mall. My friends and I were playing video games, chatting about it through our headphones. Everyone was muttering about how unreal such a thing was, as if anyone could live in such a store without being discovered. I was convinced that we could, and Ennio thought so too, but the others thought it was impossible, saying that there would be cameras and that the police would arrive just as we tried to sneak in. Then it occurred to me that maybe, if planned well, it could work. I told them Ennio was right, and I was sure there was no one watching the screens during the night. I worked in a supermarket during the summer and knew that during the day, everyone was too busy with chores, and during the evenings no one was watching the cameras, as usually nothing unusual happened in a supermarket at those hours. Our friends completely disagreed and challenged us to try. They proposed a bet. If we managed to spend the night in a supermarket, they would give us each $100, but if we were caught, we would have to pay. Honestly, it seemed crazy to me, but what teenager resists a dare? The next day, Ennio and I hit the road. We started by rewatching the movie to observe how the main character did it. Even if it was fiction, I thought we might learn something. Then, we went to our nearest Walmart, which was the place we chose for the challenge, and started evaluating possible places to hide. There wasn't a tent like in the movie, but we found that we fit perfectly in the cabinets in the furniture section. Perhaps we should have done more research, but at that point we felt confident that no one would find us there. Later that night, we reconnected with our friends to play Fortnite, informed them of our little investigation, and let them know that we accepted the challenge. They all laughed that we were actually going to do this for $100. One of them suggested that we could tell our parents that we would be spending the night at their house, and Ennio and I agreed. At about 8 p.m., Ennio and I told our parents that we would be spending the night at Nick's house, and luckily neither of them had a problem with it. There was no reason why, as it was pretty common for us to meet at either of our houses and spend the night there, so our parents were used to it. We actually did go to Nick's house, but we waited until it was 10 p.m. to go into Walmart since they closed at 11. We went in pushing a cart as if we were shopping, and when it was 10:45, we abandoned it and hid among the furniture. I watched as a worker took our cart pulled away, and I held my breath, scared that we would be discovered, but the guy didn't look at us and went on his way. I was relieved. A while later, at about 11:30, we heard all the lights go out, and soon the whole place was silent. However, we decided to wait a little longer to make sure no one was really there before finally getting out of the closets and stretching our legs a bit. Once out of the closets, Ennio and I looked at each other and I asked him, "So what do we do now?" It was then that we realized that we hadn't really thought about what to do for the night. It was too boring to stand there just looking at our phones, so we decided to start exploring the store. We wandered down the aisles, but there was nothing exciting, so I suggested going to the off-limits areas. When I worked at the supermarket, I had always wanted to go behind doors that were closed to the public, so it seemed great to do that in the huge Walmart. Ennio loved the idea, so we headed to the back of the store, but just as we were about to enter, we heard what sounded like a door closing. My friend and I froze on the spot. We looked at each other in confusion and tried to figure out where the noise was coming from. "Did you hear that?" whispered Ennio. I nodded, thinking maybe it was just a fan or something, which calmed us down a bit. We moved on and went through the back doors. Ennio was grinning from ear to ear. Surely he was really enjoying the excitement of the moment, but it was too dark, so we thought about turning on a light. However, we quickly realized that would be a bad idea, so we decided better to pull out our phones to light our way. The back turned out to be huge, much bigger than the tent we had come from. Instead of plastic walls, they were made of concrete, and there were 3 rows of silver shelves and a bunch of boxes stacked in the corners. As we walked down those forbidden aisles, we began to hear a constant brushing. Then we stopped dead in our tracks and looked at each other. I put a finger to my lips, signaling Ennio to be quiet, trying to decipher where the sound was coming from. I had no idea what it could be, but it was quite disturbing. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else there. I whispered to Ennio that maybe it would be better to get out of that place. He nodded and started to follow me closely as the creaking noise didn't stop. Just as we reached the doors leading to the area where we weren't supposed to be, I noticed that Ennio had stopped talking. I looked back, and to my surprise, he was no longer behind me. "Ennio," I called out to him in a whisper. "This isn't funny. Come out wherever you are. This is no time for games." But he didn't answer. At that moment, the little noise we were hearing stopped. I paid close attention to my surroundings, looking to hear footsteps, breathing, or any noise that would reveal where my friend had gone, but I heard nothing. "Ennio," I shouted, calling out to him louder. "Where are you?" Then his voice echoed from somewhere dark. "Kevin," he called to me. His voice sounded alarmed, so I called him back, and once again he answered me. But his voice now sounded more alarmed than before. I started searching the walls until I found the light switch. I turned it on, and now I could see everything, but still not Ennio. "I'm coming, Ennio," I shouted again, but received no response this time. However, a shiver ran down my spine as a distant laugh echoed through the place. I looked in all directions but saw nothing, so I began to pace the halls, calling out to him, looking to see his figure somewhere, when suddenly I looked around a corner and thought I saw a pair of legs stretched out on the floor. "Ennio," I muttered as I slowly approached, and a knot began to imprison my stomach. I kept getting closer until I finally saw him. He was lying on the ground, barely breathing. There was a large wound in his stomach, and he was barely conscious. "Ennio, what happened to you?" He turned his head towards me, breathing heavy and with narrowed eyes. Then he said in a whisper, There is a man." At that moment, he looked behind me and pointed with his trembling finger. I slowly turned around and saw a guy with an axe who looked like something out of a horror movie. He was like Freddy Krueger, but without the scars or knives in his hands, just an evil smile that commanded fear and a big axe in his hands. "Who are you?" he asked in a very slow tone. I didn't know what to say, so I stammered, "I'm Kevin." His grin widened even more. Then he raised his axe and began swinging it at me. I managed to dodge it in time, but just barely. At that moment, I looked back at Ennio and saw that he motioned for me to run away, but I couldn't just walk away and leave him behind. I'm not that kind of friend. Instead, I ran to where he was and helped him up by putting an arm around my shoulder. At that moment, I realized something else, and that is, when the man missed the attack with the axe, it hit the ground hard, breaking it on impact. But the momentum made him fall, and he was having a hard time getting up. This gave me a head start to walk away carrying Ennio, and when the man finally got up, I noticed that he had a severe limp. "Why doesn't he run after us?" asked Ennio, who could barely speak from the pain. I told him that he apparently had a disability in one of his legs, and we had to take advantage of that to get out of there alive. We headed for the exit doors, and as we did, I could hear the guy dragging his axe right behind us. I tried to move faster, but I couldn't force Ennio, so I made my way as best I could to the hallway where the bandages and alcohol were, thinking maybe I could do something until we could get some real medical assistance. I heard the axe on the floor, but it wasn't making as much noise anymore. Maybe the floor was providing some cushioning, or maybe it was lagging behind. We finally got to the dressing area, and I quickly grabbed several packs and started to put pressure on his wound. I didn't know exactly what to do, but in the movies they always say to apply pressure, so that's what I did. "Oh, Kevin," I heard Ennio groan from the pain, and he looked like he was about to pass out. At that moment, my heart stopped because I also started to hear the guy with the axe very close to us. However, at that same instant, I started to hear another sound. They were footsteps, like several people running, and they were coming right in our direction. In an instant, the sound of the axe stopped, and towards the end of the aisle, a couple of policemen and a Walmart manager appeared. It was as if the guy with the axe vanished into thin air at the sight of them. Ennio was taken to the hospital by an ambulance while I told the officers everything that had happened. Fortunately, my friend survived. It turned out that he needed a lot of stitches and a blood transfusion, but the police arrived just in time. After I told them everything that had happened, the officers started searching all over Walmart, but they couldn't find anyone. I described the guy to them as best I could, emphasizing his limp, as this was a detail that could help identify him easily, but they simply said they would call us if they found out anything. In the end, it was never known. The case remained unsolved because the guy was never found, but Ennio and I still managed to get away with it. Fortunately, the Walmart manager did not press charges against us for breaking into the property in the middle of the night, something for which we may well have faced legal consequences. We are very grateful for that, although we were not spared a scolding from our parents for our recklessness. Since that time, I have never been able to enter Walmart again because to do so is to relive all the horror we went through that night. I promised my daughter, Carla, age 8, that if she behaved well during her doctor's appointment, I would buy her a toy. She had a pretty extensive history of outbursts at those visits, so I was doing everything I could to keep a circus from breaking out, and apparently it worked. Carla was an angel with the doctor. She didn't even let out a tear when she got her shots, and was as well behaved as she ever wanted to be. For that reason, after we left the doctor's office, we headed to the mall to get her treat and a few things we needed. I was super excited, so the first thing was to go to the toy section. I capped it at $15 and told her to pick out whatever she wanted, all the while praising her for her good behavior. Carla perused the shelves very carefully, making sure to make the most of that opportunity, until she found a robotic pirate bear that she loved from the first moment she saw it. It was a brown stuffed animal dressed as a pirate, with an eye patch and a hook instead of a hand. Just seeing it gave me chills. Teddy bears are supposed to be cuddly, but this one was scary. His expression was like he was angry, and that hook in his hand. It was just weird. "Are you sure you want that, honey?" I asked her. "Maybe we should up the budget to $20 so you can get a new Barbie," I proposed. But she insisted she wanted that bear. I remember she had just seen Pirates of the Caribbean with her dad, so she was in good pirate mood. Although I wanted her to choose something else, I let the matter go. She had earned it with her good behavior. So we added the pirate bear to the cart and moved to the cleaning products section. Carla wanted to hold the bear as we walked through the super, so I let her. She was excitedly pushing the button to hear everything the bear said, and the first thing he blurted out was "You can keep a secret," and then something about the pirate code of honor. Knowing a little about the history of pirates, I thought it was funny that they thought they had a code of honor, and I laughed at that. It was just a toy after all, and didn't need to be historically correct, I guess. When we got home, her dad helped her open the package. The bear came with a remote control so she could move it as she pleased. It was pretty nifty and cost only $14. I thought it was a pretty cool toy for such a low price. Quickly, the bear became Carla's favorite toy, and she decided to call him Mr. Crispy. I must say that as the days went by, we would hear Carla and Mr. Crispy having the weirdest talks. She wanted to take him everywhere, even to school, but we told her that the bear should stay at home. However, one time we let her take him to a play date, and that's where the trouble started. I dropped Carla off at a friend's house for an afternoon of play, and when I went to pick her up, the girl's mom, Anna, told me she needed to talk to me about something serious and looked worried. She explained to me that she had run into Carla and her daughter playing a wrestling game, and at first I got a little giggly because, well, kids always want to experience new things, so I thought it was normal. But then Anna continued and told me that it wasn't just any wrestling. I mean the kind of games kids usually do where they knock each other down and do arm and leg grabs. No. Anna said that when she came into the room, she saw Carla strangling her daughter, as she was desperately trying to free herself from her grip. The mom asked Carla to let go, and the two girls were silent. Anna mentioned that if she hadn't come when she did, she didn't know if Carla would have let go of her daughter. This left me in shock. Carla wasn't usually an aggressive child, and where had I seen that? I tend to be very strict with the things my daughter watches on TV, and I don't let her be in front of screens unsupervised either. I had no idea where Carla could have seen someone strangling another person to mimic that action. Anna was quite frightened by what happened, and so she decided to talk to me. She told me that she then asked the girls what had happened. According to her daughter, Mr. Crispy had suggested a new game, which, by the way, they had to keep secret. At one point, Carla complained something to Sophie, Anna's daughter, about the pirate code, and she was surprised. So Anna told them that it was just a toy and that it wasn't real. I agreed with Anna that it was something strange, because Carla had never been so aggressive before. I apologized to her for my daughter's behavior and promised her that I would talk to Carla about the incident and the bear. When Carla came out of the house, I noticed that her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. I wondered if she was embarrassed, so as we chatted in the car, I took the opportunity to ask her. She explained that Mr. Crispy had scolded her for breaking the pirate code. I assumed she was just playing with the bear, but maybe she took it too seriously. I asked him about the wrestling thing, and instead of answering, he changed the subject. "Honey, Mrs. Miller told me that was with you. Can we chat about it?" Carla folded her arms and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I resent her lying to me, but I kept my cool and said, "Mrs. Miller told me about it, so I want you to tell me your side before Dad and I talk about what's going to be done about it." "That's not right. You could have hurt someone." "I'm telling you, I don't know what you're talking about," Carla replied very defensively, hugging Mr. Crispy tightly. The rest of the ride home was silent. Her dad and I were talking about it, and we didn't know what to think. as Carla had never engaged in violent behavior and had never shown any interest in fighting. I was afraid that maybe the pirate obsession was getting to her more than it should. I told my husband that we could keep Mr. Crispy for a few days to see if he would get over his fascination with the pirate thing, but what worried me most was that the bear was encouraging Carla to keep secrets. That was what really bothered me. Carla was reluctant to tell me what had happened, and honestly, I think it was because one of the things Mr. Crispy said was, "Can you keep a secret?" So my husband and I agreed that it would be a good idea to keep the bear for a few days. That morning, while we were eating breakfast, we explained to Carla that she was going to be without Mr. Crispy for a while. We thought there was going to be a strong reaction from her, but what happened was much more intense than we imagined. Carla had such a fit of rage. She threw her plate against the wall and started crying and kicking. It was quite a show. "Carla, you need time without Mr. Crispy," we told her. No, you don't understand. I hate you," she screamed, running to her room and slamming the door shut. My husband and I looked at each other in shock. We hesitated for a moment, but then decided to give her some space before taking the bear. After about half an hour, I approached his room to confiscate the bear. But just as I was about to open the door, I could have sworn I heard Mr. Crispy say something like, "It's going to be okay, Carla. We'll see you soon, just keep it a secret." I thought I was hallucinating. I knocked softly on the door and Carla opened it, reluctantly handed me the bear, and I thanked her. Then I put it away in my closet, high up where I knew Carla couldn't reach it. But as I turned to leave, I heard the bear say, "Big mistake." At that moment, I felt a shiver run through my body. This time, I was sure of what I heard. I slowly turned around and the bear seemed to be looking at me with its uncovered eye, which was now a bright blood-red color. On shaky legs, I walked over to him, picked him up again, and pressed the button that made him talk, hoping he was just imagining things, but he just said the same old thing. "You can keep a secret." I stared at the bear for a few seconds, then put it back, and I swear I almost felt the stuffed animal laugh as I closed the closet door. Later, I talked to my husband about what had happened, and he suggested that maybe I was too stressed about Carla's behavior. That thought made sense, so I tried not to dwell on it. However, things were about to take a very scary turn. That night, we were awakened by Carla standing at our bedside, her eyes full of anger and an attitude I had never seen in my daughter before. "What are you doing here, honey?" my husband asked her, but she almost didn't answer because she was sobbing. "I came for Mr. Crispy," she said with tears in her eyes. My husband and I looked at each other equally dismayed. He got up and took her back to her room, but she kept crying and telling him she needed Mr. Crispy. I couldn't help but cry too. What was happening to my daughter? It scared me to think that she might need counseling. My husband went back into the bedroom but went straight to the closet where he had kept the bear, pulled it out, and without a word, began to inspect it under the lamplight. "Oh my God," my husband exclaimed between alarmed and surprised. But before I could ask what was wrong, he turned the bear over and ripped it open, and what I saw left me completely horrified. The teddy bear was a robot inside. At that moment, my husband looked at me with a horrified expression in his eyes and said, "I don't want to sound crazy, but I think someone is manipulating Mr. Crispy and talking to our daughter through him." He then pointed his finger at the bear's right eye and continued, "If you look at his eye in the light, it looks like a camera." I got very upset hearing that and remarked to him that just in the afternoon, when I heard him talking, I thought I saw that eye had turned bright red. He opened his eyes wide when I told him this. "I'm going to take it apart to see if there is indeed a camera in there," he added, starting to disassemble the bear. My husband is a software engineer and knows robotics, so he spent a good part of the night working on Mr. Crispy. The next morning, he stopped me before going downstairs for breakfast. "I think we need to talk to the police about this. I found a broadcast signal. Someone is controlling the bear and talking to Carla through it," my husband said rather worriedly. I felt my blood run cold at that instant. That's the reason behind the strange and aggressive behavior our daughter has been exhibiting. I can't explain to you the mixture of anger, worry, and guilt I felt at that moment. After all, I was the one who bought her that demonic bear. "We'll tell her that Mr. Crispy left because his friends called him," I proposed, sure that she would accept it. When I told her this, Carla was saddened, but she accepted it and said Mr. Crispy had a lot of responsibilities. After talking to the police, they told us that they could not trace the signal and therefore could do nothing. They recommended us to inform the company that manufactured the toy about what happened, Since it was not certain that there was only one copy of this toy that was altered in that way, most likely there were others. That's what we did. We sent an email to the company, whose data appeared on the label, but we never got a response. After that incident, we now thoroughly check every toy we buy for Carla, making sure that nothing like Mr. Crispy ever happens again. A few years ago, I was going through a bad financial situation. I was unemployed and needed to get a job urgently, but I had no luck with my applications anywhere. Then a friend told me about finding a job as a nanny through Craigslist. It sounds weird, but when I checked, I was surprised at how many offers there were. Usually I wouldn't have done it, but at the time I was in dire need of it. Babysitting seemed like the fastest way to make some money, especially since I had babysat as a teenager, and my brother has 2 little ones that I also babysat frequently. So I felt like I had the experience I needed. How complicated could it be to babysit for a few hours? So that same day I got my first client and scheduled a job for Saturday night. That same night I started talking to a woman named Stella. She told me that she and her husband would be leaving the house around 5:15 p.m. and would be back after 10 p.m. She gave me the address and details about the children. She had to take care of 2, a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. I thought this was going to be a piece of cake, since at that age they are easy to entertain and didn't require constant care like babies. I shared what I was doing with my friend, who got a little jealous because she had never earned as much babysitting as I was about to do. I arrived at the address Stella provided, and in that instant I regretted it. The house was in a very suspicious neighborhood. It wasn't a violent place, but it was clearly a rather poor and neglected area. When I knocked on the door, they didn't answer right away, so I waited a while and knocked a couple more times. Finally, a strange and rather gruff guy opened the door. He was tall, thin, with a super big gray beard, and was probably about 55 years old, although his appearance could fool you. This man had a gruff voice and said to me, "Sorry, honey, I didn't hear. Sometimes my ears don't work so well." When I entered the house, the first thing I noticed was that it was no place for kids. Everything was a mess, full of garbage and clutter. I was just in the driveway when the guy told me that his wife was due back soon with the kids and urged me to sit down and make myself at home. I mentally apologized, trying not to judge, but the place was a real mess. I know it sounds like I should have run away, but I wanted to give them a chance and not be unfair. The man pointed down a hallway and indicated that the living room was at the end, so I went there and sat down on a blue couch that looked like it had seen better days. At that point, anxiety came over me, especially since there were no traces of children around, no pictures, no toys, nothing to suggest that 2 little ones lived there. This had me intrigued and quite uneasy. As I waited, I heard the man moving around the house and mumbling things. Every now and then he would call out, "Sorry about this. My wife is sometimes a bit forgetful, but I promise she'll be back soon." A few minutes later, the guy appeared in the room, scratching his head and smiling like it was nothing. "I'm a complete idiot," he said. "I bet my missus already brought the kids down through the basement. They're probably waiting for you downstairs. It's just that no one uses the main entrance, right? Why don't you peek in and check it out?" He told me, pointing to a door on the other side of the room that led to the basement. I didn't quite know what to do, so I just nodded and told him I'd go look, but really I'd had enough. This was all too suspicious. At that point, with a weird smile on her mouth, she said, "Great, honey. I'll see you in a bit," and went back to the front door. Out of sheer curiosity, I opened the basement door and instantly realized that no one was there. The lights were off and the smell was unbearable. There was definitely no way I was going down into that dark hole. As I looked down into the basement, I heard the man moving around in the front room, so without thinking, I hurriedly ran to the front door where he had entered. But when I got there, the door was locked. Fortunately, I hadn't passed him the key, so I quickly opened it and bolted for my car. When I got there, I heard the guy yelling from inside the house, but I didn't stop to look. I started backing down the driveway, and as luck would have it, I saw him coming out of the house, waving his hands like a madman, and by the time he got to the driveway, I had already started to drive away. I almost didn't call the police because I thought maybe I was overreacting since physically I was fine, but after talking to my friend, she convinced me that it was best to alert the authorities just in case. After making the call, I had no idea what was going to happen. The operator just told me that they would take care of everything, and that was the important thing. Maybe the family I ran into were just poor people who shouldn't have been so quick to judge. Maybe there was an entrance to the basement that they did indeed use, but honestly, I'd rather look like a crazy person than risk putting myself in a situation of real danger. Any way you slice it, everything that was going on was very suspicious and made me feel like I had to run away. I never found out what happened to that man or if there were really children there. I just gave the police a heads up on the situation and then heard nothing more. Fortunately, a few days later, I got a call from one of the jobs I'd applied for a few weeks ago. It was as a cashier in a supermarket, but the salary was good, so I didn't hesitate to accept the position and I didn't have to work as a nanny anymore. My name is Emma, I'm 33 years old, and I spent most of my life working as an administrative assistant. But everything changed when my husband Mason found out he was getting a promotion at his job. With that, I was finally able to quit my job and devote myself to writing mystery and crime novels, something I had always dreamed of. I published my first book independently a few years ago, but it didn't sell much, so I felt like a big failure. However, I didn't give up and vowed that my next book would be different. So while I was writing, I immersed myself in the world of digital marketing and sales. I watched a lot of YouTube videos from other authors and took a lot of notes of tips and suggestions that I would later apply in my own work. By the time I finished my new book, Mason had already gotten his promotion, which meant more advertising money. But I had to do my part too. So I created a website to promote my work and opened several social media accounts. But without a doubt, most importantly, I opened a TikTok account. An author I was following said that her sales skyrocketed thanks to the followers she got on that platform. Although I had no idea how it worked, I didn't let that stop me, so the first thing I did was set up the camera outside and write a short script to introduce myself. I practiced several times until I got it right and then recorded it. It took me an hour to make a 1-minute video, but I was happy with the result. I then posted it and shared the link on my new networks. By the end of the day, I had less than 25 views and very little interaction. It was a disaster, so I decided to drop the script and record another video, this time just talking about my passion for murder mysteries. I was much more excited about this one, but the views were still very low. At that point, I was about to throw in the towel on TikTok, until the next day I looked at my phone and saw that my second video had gone viral. I couldn't believe it. From having 10 or 15 views, I went to thousands in one night. I was anxious to tell Mason the good news, but he had already left for work, so I made my coffee and started checking the comments. However, as I was reading the comments people were leaving on my video, I noticed something odd. People were writing things like, "Is this real? And did anyone else see this?" This caught my attention because I didn't quite know what exactly they were referring to. But then as I scrolled through the comments, I found one that really caught my attention. This one said, "The body looks so realistic." This really puzzled me. What body were they talking about? I watched the video again, looking for what was going on, and although I didn't see anything strange at first, I then noticed movement in the background. I went back to the beginning and watched it again, and that's when I understood what they were talking about. As I was recording, Mason could be seen far away, dragging what looked like a corpse from the house toward the tool shed. Even though he was far away, he appeared to be a burly guy dressed in a suit. I saw him carry the body behind the tool shed and then reappear to grab a shovel. I couldn't see what he would do next, but a shiver ran down my spine immediately. It was really disturbing and creepy what I was looking at. I couldn't believe it. My recording had captured my husband burying a body in our yard. After seeing this, it was no wonder it went viral. Everyone thought it was a publicity stunt to promote my mystery novels, but clearly it was not. I spent some time processing what that meant. Mason was a murderer. The man I had been married to for 7 years, the love of my life, was a murderer. I didn't call the police, even though it was what I really should have done, but I needed to understand it a little better before I acted. At that point, I decided to check the garage to confirm that Mason's car was gone. Then, taking a deep breath, I nervously made my way to the tool shed in our backyard. The shovel Mason had used was still leaning against the wall, so I grabbed it and started digging where he was supposed to have buried the body. The dirt was still soft, so it wasn't many minutes before I hit something hard and immediately covered my mouth in shock and nerves. After digging some more, I confirmed my worst fears. It was definitely a body. With enough effort, I managed to dig it up, and when I cleared the ground enough to make out the victim, I froze in panic. It was Mr. Brown, Mason's former boss. Then it all became very clear to me. That's why he was promoted. He had killed the only guy standing between him and the top job in the company. I remembered when Mason told me about his promotion. He had told me that Mr. Brown had moved on, but now it all made sense. I didn't know what to do. I was scared and in shock. I ran back to the house, determined to call the police, but when I got there, I froze. "Honey, what's going on?" said Mason to me, who appeared out of nowhere. I didn't hear him come in, so I looked at him with wide eyes and said nothing. "Aren't you supposed to be at work?" He explained that he had come back for some papers, but as he spoke, I couldn't help but notice that he was looking at me uneasily, as if he was trying to figure out if I had learned his secret. Then his smile immediately faded when he saw the truth on my face. "I did it for you," he told me, and his words made me want to vomit. He began to tell me that his company took away his promotion after Mr. Brown decided to stay another 5 years. Since he didn't have the courage to tell me, he made the decision to make sure his promotion went through. I had never seen this side of my husband, and it was horrible. "How did you find out?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "TikTok," I mumbled, and I didn't know why I did. At that moment, his mind went. Mason grabbed my phone just as I was about to dial 911, but instead he opened my TikTok. I tried to snatch it from him, but he pushed me to the floor, causing my phone to slide under the couch. "Don't hurt me!" I yelled in desperation. He stood in front of me with his eyes full of madness. "I'm not a bad person," he said, laughing in a cold way. "You killed someone," I replied, and he, now very defiantly, asked me if I was going to tell anyone. "I have to," I said. "People already saw you." I was a total mess. I was on the internet. At that point, everything went out of control. Mason lunged at me and grabbed me by the throat hard. He didn't look at all like the man I knew. He was a complete stranger. As he squeezed, everything went dark. I felt like I was going to die right then and there. Then everything around me began to fade and I blacked out. The next time I opened my eyes, I was strapped to the couch with Mason staring at me in a very intense way. I had never seen that look before in his eyes. "You woke up," he said, and he had that smile on his face that chilled my blood. He wasn't going to let me go until I promised him I would keep his secret. He had killed someone, and according to him, he wasn't going to let me ruin it. I begged him to change his mind. "You still love me, I know." I tried to appeal to his human side, exasperated. Then she began to explain how she had ended up with Mr. Brown, detailing every step she took to cover her tracks. He kept repeating that he did it for us, but I couldn't reason it out. Something inside him had snapped. In the end, I felt I was out of options and I blurted out, "Kill me already," because I'd rather do that than live with a murderer. He gave a disturbing chuckle and then pulled a knife out of his pocket, the same one he had used to finish off Mr. Brown. Then he approached me wild-eyed and without a hint of compassion in his gaze. But just when I thought my end had come, the door burst open and an army of policemen rushed in like a whirlwind. "Cops, put your hands up." I thought that upon being discovered, Mason would turn himself in, but he was beside himself, so a brutal fight broke out as they subdued him and put him in handcuffs. One of the officers came up to me and cut my ropes. "How did you find me?" I asked, my heart still racing. "We got tons of calls from your TikTok followers," he replied, relieving my hands. At that moment, I reached for my phone that had slipped under the couch, and there it was, in the middle of a live stream. My phone had streamed everything that had happened live, the assassination attempt, Mason's madness, everything. I looked at the camera and all my followers, smiling almost forcibly but very grateful to them. "Thank you. I promise my next book will be just as exciting as this," I told them. Mason was sentenced to life in prison for Mr. Brown's crime, and I never wanted to see him again. Even the divorce document we signed from a distance, him from prison and me from my new home in the next town over. My name is Clara, and I work as a teacher in an elementary school. Last year I was in a charter school that was a real mess, all run by a woman named Monica. She started the school just before everything got messed up by the pandemic, and most of the people who worked there were from her family. I was the only outsider in the group, and of course she treated me terribly because the other teachers were all in the same clan. Since I had been teaching in public schools for years, I knew that many of her decisions were a disaster. So I resisted her crazy ideas, but always with the kids' best interests in mind. That's why when Monica announced a school field trip to a place they called Canon Verde, I was surprised to be selected as one of those in charge. Of course I accepted because I love taking kids on adventures, especially outdoors. The bus arrived at the canyon and I took care of half of the students, while Monica stayed with the rest. Most of the kids in her group were her nephews and cousins, and we had a great time, seeing some ancient Native American petroglyphs and impressive rock formations. The kids were really enjoying themselves. As we were walking back to the bus, we saw several of Monica's kids approaching. "Miss Clara, we can't find Miss Monica," said Bruce, one of Monica's nephews, visibly nervous. I asked the boys to wait on the bus while I went to look for her. I remember being furious a lot, as Monica had broken the main rule of the ride. She had left her students behind and gone off somewhere on her own. I looked all over for her, but I couldn't find her. So I went back to the bus, hoping that she had already returned and was with the kids, but to my surprise, the bus had left. I couldn't believe it. I was left there. I tried to use my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, and I knew that in a situation like this, the best thing to do was to stay calm and wait. But the frustration was killing me, and I was starting to get very nervous. However, after a while I saw a white van approaching. I didn't know the guy driving it and had never seen him before, but I started waving for him to stop. He pulled over, looked at me, and asked me what I was doing alone in the middle of nowhere. I told him that the school had dropped me off, and he started to scold me for getting separated from the group. But it wasn't the time for a lecture, especially since it wasn't my fault, so I kept quiet while he continued talking. As I listened to him, I noticed that his tone was very similar to Monica's, and when I looked into his amber eyes, I thought they were quite similar to hers. I had a strong hunch that this guy was also part of her family. At the end of his sermon, he told me to get in to take me back to town, but I didn't have a good feeling about it, so I blurted out a "Where are you from?" type question. He looked at me funny and told me he was from Wisconsin. That got me thinking, because it turns out Monica was from there too. That was all I needed. This couldn't be a coincidence, so I had to act fast. As a teacher, I'm always ready, so I had pepper spray in my backpack. At that moment, I walked up to his window and sprayed him right in the face. The guy screamed from the pain, just enough to distract him as I reached in and pulled the keys out of the ignition. As he writhed from the sting of the pepper spray and tried to snatch the keys from me, I demanded he tell me what was wrong, but he wouldn't budge, so I sprayed him again and his stinging increased as he screamed curses at me. He was desperately trying to wipe his face, and I warned him that if he didn't answer what I was asking, I would spray his face again. That's when he mumbled that his name was Steve and that he was Monica's brother. The guy told me that his whole family hated me and wanted to get rid of me. That he told me that his family hated me, didn't take me by surprise, but that they wanted to get rid of me, did strike a chord with me because of the tone, and that he told me. I asked him directly how they planned to get rid of me. After he refused to talk and I pepper sprayed him again, he finally told me what the plan was, and what came out of his mouth left me speechless. He would take me to some remote place in the desert, kill me, and then hide my body so everyone would think I was lost in the canyon. That's what he managed to say between complaints while I stared at him completely dumbfounded. I opened the door and threw him out of the truck. Then I got in the car and struggled with the keys until I managed to start the engine. When I got back to town, I went straight to the police station, and when I arrived, I saw the school bus parked there. But all the kids had already left, only the driver was there, who was also Monica's cousin. I slipped out so he wouldn't notice me and went into the waiting room. The students were in the lobby. When they saw me, they jumped out of their seats and gave me a giant hug. I asked them what was going on, and they told me Monica was inside talking to the police about my disappearance. They pointed toward a door leading to the office area. I told the guys to be quiet and sit down. I then approached the door, which was ajar, and overheard Monica telling the police officer how I had supposedly left my students behind in the canyon and disappeared. The officer looked concerned and mentioned that he would send his men to look for me, but clearly that would not be necessary. I yanked open the door and strutted in, saying, "Thank you very much, officer, but I'm safe. Who you should go looking for in the desert is this woman's brother who tried to kidnap and murder me on her orders, but instead he got a pepper spray bath and I left him there." Monica looked at me with a horrified face, and although she tried to say something, she was so shocked that she only managed to stammer. At that moment, Monica was preventively detained until they managed to bring her brother in, and he confessed to the whole plan. Both were arrested and faced charges of attempted kidnapping and murder. After that, the charter school closed and I went back to teaching in a public school. Sure, they're not perfect either, but nothing compares to what I experienced at that school. I really hope that pair of delinquents spend a lot of time in prison and I never have to see them again. It was the day that Omegle, the company where I had spent almost 8 years, had to close its doors. For some time now, the accusations that had arisen during his career had brought the company to the brink of bankruptcy. The chaos of thousands of accumulated lawsuits had left the team with no choice but to declare insolvency. And there I was, on the last day of work, feeling like I was in a melancholy movie. My role was to manage the B side of the website, and I was surrounded by the customer service team and, of course, Charlie, a guy who always tried to keep my spirits up. But today there was a feeling in the air that the situation was dire. Truth be told, I had no idea what was going on with the whole legal side of things until it was publicly announced that this was the last day in the office, so it took us all by surprise. So there I was, packing my things on a tray, something that reminded me of my time in high school, when I was cleaning out my locker before summer vacation. The office was practically empty, and I felt a little weird because I was one of the last ones left. I had the responsibility of uploading a farewell message on the website, explaining to people why Omegle had come to an end. As I gathered my things, I stopped for a moment and looked around. Back then, the place was vibrant, full of energy, hustle and bustle, laughter, jokes, and lots of work. Now everything was quiet and calm. It felt like the echo of a goodbye. As I closed the front door for the last time, a lump formed in my throat. I walked to my car, and as I stepped back, I couldn't help but look at the building once more. I had devoted nearly a decade of my life to this place, and sadness washed over me from head to toe at the thought of leaving it behind forever. A few tears slipped down my cheeks as I tried to process that it was, after all, time to move on to something else and close this chapter of my life. But that's not the end of the story. Only 10 minutes after starting, I decided to grab my phone to play some music and distract myself a bit. And in that instant, I realized that I had forgotten it in the office. Unbelievable, I thought, with irony, of course. In the blink of an eye, I had turned around, and after another 10 minutes of driving, I was back in front of the doors of the building that had been my second home for the last 8 years. I was a little surprised to see that the door was ajar. I swore I had locked it, but of course, tears not only blurred my vision but also my memory. When I walked in, I noticed that the sun was already completely out. It was winter, and that meant the days are much shorter. The building looked different in the gloom, as if it was swallowing up everything that was once vibrant and full of life. There was no need to turn on the lights. It was a place that had ceased to be home. I climbed the stairs and entered the main office, feeling like a fish out of water. Everything felt strange to me, as if I were in a movie where I didn't fit in. The office, once teeming with life, now felt empty. Every desk had been ransacked, personal belongings gone. I gave a sigh and dragged my feet to my old desk where I had left, amidst all the chaos, my phone. It gleamed there, alone in the gloom. Just as I picked it up, I decided to turn on my cell phone's flashlight because the darkness gave me a bad feeling. As I shone it on the floor, I was surprised to see a pile of papers lying around, a real mess considering I had barely been there 20 minutes before and everything was in order. I looked around with the flashlight, and it looked like a paper storm had broken out. Desks were flying through the air and mountains of folders were scattered everywhere. The chaos was total. It was then that I saw something that made my blood run cold. A filing cabinet, which seemed to have fallen over, was leaning in front of my desk, and next to it was an empty bottle of tequila. There were still a few drops spilled on the floor, which made me think that there was someone else in the building. I immediately walked over to the light switch, trying to turn it on, but to my surprise, nothing happened. The power company had cut off the supply, and now that no one was working, the place was darker than ever. With flashlight in hand, I continued scanning the room. Every corner was a surreal picture, scattered papers, overturned desks, and a gloomy atmosphere. But in that instant of confusion, a groan echoed through the air and my heart stopped. It came from one of the offices down the hall where the door was wide open. Without thinking, I headed that way. As I got closer, I noticed a faint light filtering through the darkness. My steps were cautious, and I used my flashlight to better illuminate. But what I saw made my stomach twist. It was a series of papers filled with notes on court cases, each with a photo that was the very face of horror. I didn't have the courage to look in detail, but their descriptions were enough to send a feeling of disgust and revulsion through me. The accusations were full of chilling details. It seemed that these documents were only a small part of a much darker story, a story that could drag others down with me if I wasn't careful. A shiver ran down my spine, and I wondered, who was here and what else was hidden in this mess? The tension in the air was palpable, and I couldn't help but think that maybe I wasn't alone after all. With my heart pounding a mile a minute, I knew I had to get out of there, but a part of me felt I had to find out more. I glanced toward the open door, wondering who or what had caused all this chaos and if there was any connection to the horrible things I had just seen. So I took a deep breath, adjusted the flashlight, and decided to move a little further. Repeating what I saw seemed insensitive, but the truth was that I was there, in front of a disaster that looked like something out of a horror movie. The accusations in those papers were spinning around in my head, and knowing that things had gone this far made me feel sick. My stomach churning as I stood up, I decided to continue on my way to that mysterious door where the strange sounds were coming from. I was getting closer, and the moaning I heard intensified, as if something was trying to come out of the shadows. I finally arrived at the entrance of that office, all covered with an eerie air. I had my phone in my hand with 911 already dialed, ready to press call. I didn't know what was going on inside, but caution never hurt in a situation like this. Despite that, I don't know what made me stay there because, let's be honest, I could have left and let that place be someone else's problem. Yet something in me was still tied to that place, as if some kind of foolish loyalty was telling me that I couldn't just turn around. When I poked my head in and looked inside, and immediately recognized the figure of one of my bosses. He was visibly drunk and his face was bloodied. All around him lay scattered the same macabre images I had seen before. They were pages full of complaints, and among them, pictures of grown men doing horrible things that I couldn't even name without my stomach turning. At that moment, I felt something inside me snap. Suddenly, I realized that my flashlight was still on, and as I shined my light in his direction, the manager began to raise his head. My heart stopped dead in its tracks when I saw him gouge out one of his eyes. I stepped back, quickly pressing the call button as I watched in horror as he stood up, staggering toward me. My eyes roamed his body and stopped in horror at what he was holding. A knife, dripping with what appeared to be pieces of his own eye. Adrenaline surged through my body and I ran out of there as fast as I could. Behind me, I could hear his voice yelling at me to come back, that I had seen too much. Fortunately, I managed to escape the mess and lock the manager in, bracing my weight against the front door. From the outside, I could hear him banging and shouting as he tried to open it. I didn't know if I would ever feel safe in that place again after that, but all I wanted was to get out. After a couple of minutes that felt like hours, the police finally arrived. They rushed in, and in a matter of only 5 minutes, my eyes widened like saucers as they wheeled the manager's body out on a stretcher. Sadly, he had died of exsanguination, as he had cut his own eye. But it was getting weirder by the minute. Later, when they searched the room, they found a note next to his corpse explaining that he couldn't take the blame for all the atrocities that had happened in Omegle over the years. It was as if he was saying that he was guilty, but that he wasn't the only one. I have a copy of that note. I read it from time to time, and it always leaves me with that knot in my stomach. At the end, it said that he hadn't been the only one responsible. That left the door open to even more questions. Who else was involved? How many dark secrets was that company hiding? As I walked out of the place that night, I knew it was just the beginning of a much bigger and scarier story, and that somehow those doors would open again.